left the pro-life movement after being indoctrinated and brainwashed with it for 22 years. So I grew up in Christian fundamentalism, evangelicalism. I was homeschooled the whole way through. I was raised only on Christian educational materials, and then I went to a Christian-funded college where I got married to a Christian man right after I graduated from college, who then we eventually deconstructed together and left that space. The last thing I deconstructed was the pro-life movement. And this is a really big deal because leaving the pro-life movement meant that I could now vote for whoever I wanted. And so that might sound silly, like, what do you mean? But literally, my vote was tied to my pro-life belief. I went to pro-life rallies growing up, and I had made pro-life promises that I would never, ever, ever vote for a candidate who was not pro-life. And so that meant that I was tied to the Republican Conservative Party at all times. And even though I never once agreed with the Republican Conservative Party, I thought that morally I had to vote for whoever was pro-life. I was a one-issue voter. They really encourage Christians to be one-issue voters. So I'm not the only person that fell into this indoctrinating and brainwashing of the pro-life movement. This actually came about a little before Reagan's presidency, because you see, Christians before were staunch, or Republicans were very staunch on the segregation of schools and on keeping the Christian vote. And so once schools got desegregated, the Republicans wanted a new issue that they could kind of tackle and get the evangelical vote, because evangelicals were kind of across the spectrum of whether they would vote red or blue. And so they said, hey, let's make it the issue of pro-life. We can definitely spin that to be Christian. We can say that, we can use this verse in Jeremiah out of context that says, like, he was made in the womb, which is true anyways. But anyways, so they said, yep, we need to get the pro-lifers and get the evangelicals on our side. This was extremely successful because it worked out for a lot of people. It worked out for the pastors. It worked out for the Republican Party. And then obviously the Republican Party also wanted the churches to stay tax-free, and the churches were like, yeah, and if we get these really rich people coming to our churches, we want them to have our money so they can donate more to the churches. And so it was just like a very nice meshing of the evangelicals and the Republican Party. So then you start having the 90s coming around, and where Christian fundamentalism really took off. You see it like with Bill Gothard in the IBLP, Billy Graham. He wasn't quite a fundamentalist, but he had a lot of things to do. Ken Ham came around, and Focus on the Family with James Dobson came around. All of these huge Christian evangelicals took over the Christian space. Their books flooded the bookstores, flooded the churches. It pretty much became, all the churches were talking about like Focus on the Family, and we're now this weird brand of Christianity. And so within that, a huge tenet that all of these organizations pushed was being pro-life. And again, to gain control, because the Republicans have now said they're the Christian party and that they are pro-life, and they want all of the Christians to vote for Republicans all the time so we can make America Christian again. I was even raised that America only won the Revolutionary War because we were Christian, which is funny because like the Great Britain would say they were Christian too, but my whole life I was told that Christians are persecuted in the US and we need to make sure we make America Christian again, and we need to make sure that the pro-life generation dies with our generation. I had even written on Facebook like, I am the last, or the pro-choice movement dies with our generation. I'd written on my Facebook, I am the last pro-choice generation. It's going to end with me. And unfortunately, it has. But yeah, so the indoctrination starts really early. Even to the point where birth control was looked down upon in a lot of spaces, because children's were blessing, and it got even so pro-life that like you shouldn't even prevent a pregnancy because that's almost like unaliving a child. And so it was really crazy. My parents weren't fully in the Quiverful movement, but they definitely would like wet their toes in it and were on the fringe, on the edge of the Quiverful movement, which means like not having birth control and having as many kids as possible. The only reason my parents stopped having as many kids as possible was because of health reasons. So that's good, but a lot of families will still push on past that. So I was raised with it being pretty common in my circles not even to have birth control, and then obviously it was so important to be pro-life. I was brought to pregnancy centers as a young kid, pro-life rallies as a young kid. Some of that was really, really traumatizing because I was shown really graphic pictures at these rallies of like fetuses and just like really gory stuff that a child shouldn't see, and really adult content and adult language that I shouldn't have been exposed to. But yeah, so, and at these pro-life rallies, they obviously appeal to your innocence, and they use a lot of emotional language and get really frenzied. And I was told straight up lies. Like, I really truly thought that you could choose to have an abortion up until you were pushing the baby out. Like, I thought that was true. And I thought every single state in the US could perform abortions up to 9 months, and I did not think that was right. I still don't personally think that's right unless the mother is in danger of her life and the doctor deems it necessary. But at the time, I thought people were just doing that just for giggles, you know? And I did not even know Roe v. Wade had a time limit on it. I only learned that once it was overturned. That's how lacking my knowledge was of the abortion care in the US. I was also told that most abortion clinics unalive women, and that they're not sanitary at all, and that they don't use hospital practices, which I don't know how much of that is true or not true. I think you can find a lot of doctors' offices that are more sanitary than others. But a majority of abortions are performed like in hospitals and are medically necessary. So there's that. And I was just given so much false information, and I was told that you are unaliving a baby, and there was no way that my ethics and moral could get past unaliving a baby. It was just the end-all be-all for me. I did not see how I could not admit that that was a baby. And so once Roe v. Wade got overturned, I had already deconstructed pretty much a lot of my Christian upbringing. I'm now a progressive Christian, but I was still holding on to the pro-life viewpoint just because I was like, I can't unalive a baby. And then once it got overturned, I actually did my research, which shame on me. I was going through a lot with deconstructing, having to research all the time, and I just hadn't researched this yet. But I did my research and found out that a lot of abortions that happen within the first trimester and before even the child is viable outside of the womb, or sometimes before they come to consciousness. There's a certain word for it, but I literally had no idea that the majority of abortions were performed pretty quickly. And then I also came that I had to recognize that if I was raped or something, I would want to get an abortion. And so obviously I did think it was okay in certain circumstances. And so I first started was like, well, I think it's okay in these circumstances. And then it was like, well, if I'm okay with those circumstances, why aren't I okay with others? But what really, really, really pushed me to where I am now is I personally don't ever want a woman to have an unplanned pregnancy and have to get an abortion because she's not ready and doesn't want a kid. I want to have that end. And statistically, abortions are lower under Democrat policies. And so what I like to see and what I think can fix the problem of having unplanned pregnancies for women, and I of course think abortions are totally okay and necessary when it's the child's life or the woman's life that is in danger. That should just be a given. But basically, I think that the Democrats and the pro-choice movement do a lot more to mitigating and decreasing and reducing abortions than the pro-life movement does, because they will actually provide contraception, and they will talk about safe sex and education, and they will want to do more social welfare programs to help women, so that way they have the ability to keep a child financially. They want to do free healthcare, they want to do free childcare. All of this stuff will reduce abortions, but the pro-life movement doesn't want to do it. And that's when it kind of occurred to me like, oh, the pro-life movement doesn't really want to solve the issues of abortion. They just want to use that to control women, to hurt women, and to gain the Christian evangelical vote. And so for me personally, I don't think I myself would get an abortion, but I am definitely pro-choice, 100% pro-choice, and I do want to get in safety nets so that women are okay and cared for, and so that we can reduce abortions in that way. And I don't see the Republican Party doing that. I see the Republican Party unaliving women in hospitals, and I see the effects of overturning Roe v. Wade have been just horrific for women. And yeah, that's my personal story about how I deconstructed that belief. That took me a really, really long time and many years, but I finally landed where I am now.